please welcome Jedidiah Yueh, the founder and executive chairman of Delphix, and John Brand from Forrester Research. So just a brief overview, just so you can get some clear, because obviously everybody knows John in the room. So I'll just talk a little bit around Jed. So in 1999, he founded Avamar, a software company that pioneered data dedupe, shipped a billion-dollar product in the backup and recovery industry with over 20,000 current customers. Today, dedupe is a high priority for enterprise and data centers, and for the technology to become a must-have feature of product for major storage and software vendors. Data dedupe strips away the redundant data and makes this more cost-effective than tape media for storing a wide variety of types, such as daily repeated backup sets. EMC acquired Avamar in November 2006 for $165 million. EMC executives have stated that Avamar is the best performing investment for EMC since VMware. So Yueh has demonstrated a successful track record for identifying new market opportunities and staying ahead of industry trends. As the VP of Product Management for EMC, Yueh helped launch Avamar Data Store, Avamar Virtual Edition in 2007, two innovative and successful products that have helped EMC maintain a leadership position in the industry. Prior to Avamar, Yueh served as Chief Operating Officer for NTD, an optical storage startup. He brings over a decade of experience in the software and data storage industries with more than 6 patents or patents pending. He graduated from Pi Beta Kappa, magna cum laude from Harvard University, and the former president of George H. Bush. So, guys, I think we have somebody in the room that we should all pay attention to, and that's certainly not me, so I will take myself off the stage. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks all, and thanks to Jed for joining us today. Just for those few people in the room who may not know me, John Brand, Vice President and CIO Advisor at Forrester Research. Just to set the scene there, as a CIO Advisor, I'm not a career counsellor. I'm not equipped to give you any personal advice. I don't know about you guys, but I have a lot of friends who've become life coaches. They're generally the ones that probably should have seen life coaches a long time ago themselves. That's not what you're going to get here today from me. But you will get the background that I have as a long-time industry analyst, which makes me one of the most cynical people on the planet to start with. And that probably will have some bearing on today's conversation. Having said that, it probably isn't a great title for a session, Why Companies Won't Survive the Digital Era and what they can learn from Silicon Valley. And it's a pretty negative starting point, Jed. Do you think that's an accurate statement that companies won't survive?
I think there are a lot of challenges for businesses that are looking at digital transformation or that could be disrupted by threats from the technology sector. Most companies that we work with a lot of the world's biggest companies. Almost every industry #1 across major industries uses Delphix. We help accelerate all of their application programs. We really work part and parcel with CIOs, CTOs, sometimes CEOs of companies, and help them accelerate their programs. But companies really struggle with transformation. It's in how they're organized, it's in their structure, it's in how they manage their culture. One of the big challenges companies have is what's been successful and allowed a company to dominate a single industry or to become a #1, 2, 3 in an industry. That can often be what is creating the problem today. At New York Life, for instance, they're one of the world's biggest insurance companies, and their COO is really driven around the idea of transforming the company and really driving software through all of the avenues and opportunities that they have. His biggest problem is that they wake up in the morning, stumble out of bed, and they make their quarters. Success is their biggest enemy. There's just no urgency if your business is humming, if it's operating, and you feel like you're already in command of the competition. You know how to manage the competition, you understand their product cycles, their differentiation, how to stay ahead of them or stay within your band, within your market segment. But it's really the different kind of competition that can emerge quickly that is the real threat. And it's hard to anticipate what those threats can be. There's a lot of people, everybody in this room is probably tired of hearing about Uber and Airbnb and how successful they are in transforming, the hotel industry and the taxi industry. But think about it for 1 second. They're such boring concepts. It's two guys sitting in a living room. They don't have a lot of money. They're like, you know what? We should rent out some of our space. That's how that concept for Airbnb got started. And Uber, it's like, oh, let's get a bunch of drivers and put an app so that we can deliver people around in luxury cars. They're really non-technical ideas. The reason why that's an important concept is that you can take very non-technical concepts and turn them into applications that can touch billions of consumers, transform industries. Today, it is easier than ever to have a product or business idea, whether or not it's technical, embody it in technology on platforms that can reach billions of users. And that's why there's such a threat. The leverage is really increasing. The speed at which you can build what I call an appzilla, an application that can topple an industry, has radically changed over the last decade.
Well, it's radically changed, but you used a couple of well-known examples, and when I talk to a lot of my clients, they say, well, we're not a Google, we're not an Apple, we're never likely to have the kind of financial backing that those guys have to be able to produce those. Some of those startups, they didn't have any legacy to deal with, so what relevance do those have in a world where you are an existing legacy business?
And yeah, it's a great question. It's relevant to everybody, and it's not about the financial backing. For example, Delphix, with about $15 million, I was able to build a program that we went cash flow positive from 10 to 70 million a year in sales. That's less than the price of a standard implementation of an ERP suite for most companies. So a tiny part of your budget, if applied the right way, could have huge transformative effects across an industry. So the cost of it, the capital intensity of it is not a good argument. It actually, if you have great products and great ideas and really mission, vision-driven teams, they're going to do a lot with a very small amount of capital. The real question is, are you driven to make that change and to enable products to take on your industry and maybe disrupt the industry that you're sitting in?
You also made a comment earlier there about the role of software, and it's often said that software's eating the world. Do you think that is the starting point? Is thinking about our organisation as a piece of software, and how do we transform our organisation to operate on a piece of software? Is that the key to?
Yeah, software is eating the world, and it's not eating the world. It's not like software feeds you or cooks you dinner or does any of the things that it doesn't dress me in the morning. So software can't really touch a lot of the world, but what software is doing is it's insinuating itself everywhere it possibly can insinuate itself. Obviously, as things like IoT emerge, it'll be able to collect data and do more things with more of the objects that it can interact with in the world. The real key to understanding why software is eating the world is it's actually a story that's played out over the last 2 decades, especially over the last decade. A lot of the things that are prerequisites for software to go big and really change industries have really come into fruition or come into place over this last decade. It used to, if you wanted to build an application that could touch 1 billion people, you'd have to assemble thousands of servers in football-sized fields, data centers, and have to be able to manage physical operations for racking and stacking these systems. And then you'd have to hire the world's smartest programmers to build software that could manage and coordinate all of it and operationalize all of it and automate all of it. Today, Amazon, you can scale to whatever you want, whatever size you need, and it's by the drip. Google has open source Kubernetes, and there are all kinds of technologies like that allow you to manage thousands, millions of servers and different IT resources. And then you've got platforms. You've got platforms today, many platforms that touch billions of users that are designed for people to build applications upon. Things like platforms like Facebook and Apple, Android, iOS. All of these are platforms that touch billions of users. So if the right software applied on the right platform, on all this infrastructure that's just been put in place in the last decade, can have a revolutionary impact on many industries. At the end of the day, if these platforms are already touching all of the world's users, or a lot of your potential users or agents or resellers or partners, then there is a way to reach all of these people that you hadn't anticipated before. And in that sense, software can really eat through the way that you're interacting with employees, customers, partners, the entire chain of people that are in the works.
What about if you're in a company or industry that isn't a inherently global beast? It's not designed to touch billions of people on the planet.
Yeah, there's certainly lots of local opportunities too. So one of the biggest things, if you don't have a large-scale software opportunity, you probably still have a data opportunity. And one of the biggest things that we see in Silicon Valley is data-centric companies really outperform everybody else. And this can apply to any company at almost any scale. There's so many data sources available today that the more you instrument all of the decision making you have, the more you're really tracking all your metrics and creating, real-time data supply chains that put the right data in the hands of the decision makers and everybody else along the chain of decision making, the more powerful an organization can be. That can work in small markets or large markets. So there's a couple different facets to how software and technology are changing companies. It's not just about applications. There are data aspects as well.
Just from an industry analyst perspective, and we're guilty of it as anybody. Forrester talks about digital predator versus digital prey, and it kind of assumes you've got to be one or the other. There's nothing in between. You're going to be eaten or you're going to eat. That idea that digital disruption is kind of going to affect all companies and all industries. To come back to perhaps Colin's presentation this morning. The hype cycle that people are in, if I did a quick poll, is everybody sick to death of the term digital disruption yet? Does anyone want some more of it? I mean, it seems to me that there is this kind of expectation that everybody is going to radically transform their organisation with technology. That if you look at a lot of the digital strategies that certainly we review on a daily basis, there's very little different in there that you would have said is an evolution of their existing business with a bit of technology to support that. What makes a business, transcend that leap from just a bit of digital technology to support what it does better versus a completely game-changing organisation? Or do they all have to be completely game-changing?
They certainly don't all have to be game-changed, but the way to think about it is what can be changed by software, applications, and data. Those are the really big opportunities, and if it's an adjacency or if it's core to your industry or your business, then you want to be there first, because the rate at which something like that can happen to an industry can be very rapid. And the world today favors a dominant one. We have all of these effective monopolies that have been built so quickly over just the last decade. Companies like Amazon just dominate their space in the AWS cloud market, for instance. Or look at Salesforce and its dominance in the Salesforce automation CRM space. So it's very easy to build a dominant one. It's the time for a really great product to full market penetration, or at least cleanly being established as a number one. That time is really compressed. So it can happen to you quickly if there is that opportunity for it.
What are the classic signs that you probably should either ramp up your efforts or change the way you're approaching the problem in the first place? Are there typical signs that you see, having come from a startup environment where you see an opportunity? What things do you look for?
Some of the easy things you can look for is there a lot of venture capital investment in your sector, right? In the financial services space, there's tons of these fintech companies that are being born every month, every quarter, and so there's a lot of disruption that's on its way. For you to tell whether or not you're organized, one of the big things is most companies aren't organized in a way to handle a technology-driven approach to the future. And you can see it in how the company is structured and how it's everything all the way through their investors, to their boards, to the CEOs, to the way that they organize their companies. In a technology company like Delphix, CTOs are often the CEOs, or they report directly to the CEOs. They're the most important or second most important people inside the organization. In a lot of traditional businesses, CTOs, you'll have a CEO and maybe a COO or a CFO, and then you'll have a CIO, and then you'll have a CTO in charge of architecture underneath it. It's actually upside down. They're really not structured to make a focus, and that's where they put the responsibility for technology strategy. If you're nesting it that deeply in your organization, you know that you're not really trying to drive transformation. Transformation is something that is going to have to be driven across the entire company. You can also just look at your investor set. In the States especially, there's a lot of investor activism that's happening today. If you have institutional investors who are not prepared for long-term investments. They're really looking microscopically at margins and quarterly earnings and quarterly revenue. There's just no way for you to embark on that kind of change. The first thing you need to do is get buy-in from your investor community. That drives the board that you have, that drives the CEO and the leadership you have in the company. A lot of the time, if you really want to, I run into a lot of CIOs and CTOs who are actually very passionate about the technology changes they can drive and the opportunities they have. And then you ask them, well, how are you going about this? I'd say by and large, probably 80% of the ones that I run into, they try and carve out some budget, or they try and save inside their IT budget and reinvest that to achieve their agendas. But that's not a way to really drive transformation for a company. It has to come almost all the way from the investor through the board, through the CEO. You have to win the battle, at least with your CEO. You can contrast that kind of strategy with GE. At least GE, their CEOs bought into the transformation. They've gone through this giant marketing campaign about how they're a software and technology company, even though they're really an industrial machinery company. And so the entire market, all their investors, their board, everybody knows this is what we're trying to accomplish as a company. That's commitment to change.
Interesting. You talked about the cultural aspect, and obviously your organisational structure impacts culture, and vice versa. So where's the starting point beyond the CEO? Because you don't want to have, and again, Forrester's model is awareness and execution, and if you've got high awareness with high execution capability, you've got a formidable organisation.
Yeah.
But if you've got high awareness and sort of low execution capability, you're pretty dangerous. You've probably got an organisational culture and structure that's not effective. How do you go that next level from having the commitment of the CEO? Because I think would anyone disagree that they've probably got the commitment from the CEO or the board to do some major transformation initiative, some radical digital? Anyone not in that situation?
There are a lot of shades of gray in that, right? You might have the commitment and they've made some investment, but it's very different if the CEO is driving that change. If the CEO is literally invested and spending, at least a day a week reviewing the programs and driving the program. In technology companies, the CEO, we build the products. We're the ones who invent the products. We're the ones who drive everything. It's top down. You are literally driving transformation from the top down. And what you talked about is awareness and execution. Actually, even the language of it is problematic for the culture. So if you look at the companies you might end up competing with, an Airbnb or an Uber or companies like Delphix, it's not about awareness and execution. We're vision and mission driven companies. We have a compelling vision that can accumulate talent, the best talent we can possibly find that's related to our space, and then you drive them through a mission that really galvanizes that team to produce its best possible work. That's very different than a company that's aware and just executing. If you look, that is the core difference in culture. It's a vision, mission-driven company. That's who you might be up against. Now, you can empower a small team if you're already the industry number one, or one of the dominant players in an industry, and you have sufficient pocketbooks. If you can empower a team to be vision, mission-driven, they can also build out that opportunity within the overall umbrella. But that's the key. It's got to be vision, mission-driven. It can't be about awareness and execution.
And I think some of the organisations that we deal with on a daily basis have this kind of view that it's okay from the startup perspective, because you inherently have a culture of change. The people you attract almost by definition, and this is, I don't have any stats to back it up, but this is the perception that we often hear is, it's okay for a startup because they have those people who are almost addicted to change. And so that's what continues to drive them, is their organisational culture already has that inbuilt. How do you bring that, move it from an aversion to change, not perhaps to an addiction to change, but somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I think it's mistaking the causal relationship. So really the startups are driven by visions and missions. That creates the change. It's not that the people are just natural change agents. They're just driven by a vision and a mission that results in change. So it's cart and horse are a little bit backwards there.
And what do you see as the kind of next wave? I mean, this idea of digital disruption that everyone's kind of sick of. What do you see as that next kind of wave coming? What's really going to drive the biggest leap forward in the coming sort of 3 to 5 year horizon, maybe?
I think the platforms that the platforms keep extending. They keep insinuating themselves into more and more of every industry and into our daily lives. So if you think about all the sensor type of, all the sensors that can be put in place all over our workplaces, all over our homes, all of the data that's collecting creates this data enrichment system that can pull data into these mega platforms that applications can then be built upon. But you'll find the platforms, obviously platforms are extending into cars with Teslas and into airplanes and into all our industrial machinery and into our homes. So as those platforms get farther and farther out, and everybody's already connected via these super powerful mobile devices that put the apps, directly in touch with billions of users, there's a circuit that will just keep iterating. And so we don't know exactly what kind of apps will come out that will revolutionize different industries or just completely change the way that business processes or even some of our standard day-to-day life things we do in day-to-day life, but they will emerge. They'll certainly emerge over time, and you've got the really big crazy ones, self-driving cars and drones everywhere and things like that. That'll make a big difference.
Well, how much of an impact do you think those things realistically will make, and in what kind of timeframes? What do you see as the barriers and some of the enablers for making that happen?
Yeah, if we take the transportation industry as a case study, it's actually a really fascinating one. So everybody's pretty familiar with what Uber's done in its scale. It's worth 50, 60, 70 billion dollars today. And so they're making a major transformation in the transportation industry. But all because they've risen to power very quickly doesn't mean they're not vulnerable to disruption. For them, their existential crisis is, what if all of these autonomous self-driving cars emerge from companies like Google and now Tesla? Clearly, those companies can completely disenfranchise their core strength today, which is mobilizing this workforce of drivers and the underutilization of vehicles by individuals into this aggregated, scalable supply that changes the taxi industry. But they're also getting upended by autonomous self-driven vehicles. Now, getting self-driving vehicles to be the dominant method of transportation in any location, that's also a challenge. So you have government and political kind of ramifications. That's why there are startups now, like in places like Singapore, where you might have a government that will really back that and drive that to fruition. So that might actually be a place where that can happen first, kind of a lighthouse environment for it. So these transformations, they're going to come in waves, and the apparent first wave winners might not be the winners of the next waves. So the eat or be eaten, it's a cycle that's going to happen faster. The rise will be faster, but the life and death will be faster too.
You remember Netscape then?
Yeah, or just look at Yahoo. I mean, Yahoo was this dominant player. The entryway into the internet. It ended up being just the doormat to the internet for Google to roll through, and then Facebook to roll through behind them. It happens quickly.
Yeah. And is that the way you see the future panning out, that there will be just this continuous wave of disruptors disrupting others?
Until the opportunities are saturated by a dominant player that can't be disrupted. So
what are the keys to not being able to be disrupted then?
The keys to not being disrupted, I think, is you always have to have that mission, the vision, mission-driven orientation, and you have to enable that level of that kind of culture in a highly scaled organization. One of the other elements when you think about culture, it's not just the vision, mission at the top, it's also how you're structured from the bottom up. Another thing that I think G is doing really well is it's the Bezos 2-pizza rule for teams, and it's also the team of teams approach. But small teams that are highly intelligent, self-organizing, and then self-driven by missions and visions, they can really do a lot of damage, a lot of positive execution. And using that as your unit of operation is a really powerful model if you can scale it up to large scale.
And what do you see as some of the challenges around, that we're talking this morning about geography and some of the challenges with just basic perceptions of borders and compliance boundaries and things like that. What role do you think that's going to play, or should? How's it going to evolve, I guess?
If you step back and think about it at a macro scale, I think borders and those kinds of limitations are all becoming less and less relevant. Now, for any given application or company in a specific region, it can become really relevant. Uber gets blocked in all kinds of geographies and countries. But overall, I think all of these borders are decreasing. It is easier to build something truly global now than it ever was before. So you get kind of these micro pockets of resistance, but the Luddites will fail in the end.
That's a good headline to run with tomorrow, I'm sure. What about, from the process perspective in organisations, you mentioned a whole bunch of examples where it was taking the inefficiencies out of an existing industry, Uber being a classic example, or unused inventory in the case of Airbnb. What about within an organisation at a grassroots level, if you don't have that support of the CEO, or even if you do, but you don't have the ability to do it across the entire organisation, where can you have the greatest impact?
You could certainly take the tack that I think a lot of CIOs and CTOs take, which is let's bite off, let's pick selected programs where we can show we're making a real difference, drive real returns, micro transformations, and then build up from there. But I think that is a very long road to change, and you're better off trying to fight the battle at the top. And if you can't win the battle at the top, it's just an organization that isn't ready to change. And eventually, urgency will emerge if clear threats materialize on revenue, margin, and placement within an industry. So sometimes you just need to know when you can't win that battle. And if you really are yourself you're somebody who wants to drive transformation, then find an organization that's better aligned to it.
Or create a crisis.
Or create the crisis, yeah.
Not recommending that as a strategy, by the way, but just a flippant comment that will probably come back to haunt me at some point. In terms of the things that you're seeing that organisations are doing around metrics and measurement for digital, how are you seeing that evolve? We've become obsessed with metrics increasingly since the dawn of time. But are we measuring the right things? Should we be looking at this in a completely different way?
Yes and no. I think you want to instrument and drive metrics for just about everything, but it still theories about what you can do with the data that can drive change that you should test iteratively. That at the end of the day, it's what people do with the data that really matters. Now you can't do anything with the data if you don't have the data, so collecting all the data is just a good idea in today's day and age, and you're likely to find great opportunities within your data if you do that. It still takes the right kind of data science approach within an organization to yield great results, and that takes people who are data-driven, data-minded, who understand the way a business functions and operates and how it competes. So you have to kind of align both your data science strategy with real understanding of the business, its operations, and its competitive context. But if you can marry those, you can make a difference. I think data-driven organizations will outperform their market peers by a large margin over the coming years. That's an easy place for you to drive real significant, credible change in the organization.
And what are the attributes of those kind of organizations? What do you see that they do?
Yeah, they are, the companies that are best designed for data science and data enablement. They're mindful of the data supply chains. They're mindful for having very fresh data at the hands of their decision makers. They have a single shared lexicon of the data across all their teams and all their systems. Everybody is trained in how to think about and access, how to think about, how to talk about, and how to access data. So you have to drive that consistency. You see so many companies that have data that is that they have the master data management challenge. They don't have the same way of talking about data, labeling data. They end up, if you think about, if you were to look into data warehouses, you have these data supply chains where data is getting fed in from different systems at all kinds of varying rates of success and timeliness. there's no way for you to really become a data-driven company unless you can tackle those issues. And so you have to have a data-centric culture in order to achieve that. And that starts with a common model, common lexicon, training of everybody who's along the process, and then a commitment to using data to drive a lot of the decision making. And that's hard to do because most of the time in organizations today, the data is trapped in all these silos. It's hard to move around. Moving it around in scale for tens to hundreds of thousands of applications is really laborious, and it's a chain that constantly has breakages. So getting that right takes real willpower and execution and effort.
Yeah, because I mean, this isn't the first time in history that we've said, data is important to the running of the business and transforming the business. Yet we have seen some good examples of organisations who've managed to not just produce good, high quality data for decision making, but put that into action, actually make that change the way the business operates, and do that in some cases a very autonomous fashion. Is technology responsible for that, or is it? Because we've changed the way that we've approached that problem, has that had an impact of it, or is it just the way we've thought about it that has changed the way we implement it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, there's definitely a little bit of both. Maybe I'll give you a real-world example. So the CIO of HP, they recently won this award for their Delphix implementation because they were able to split the company into two halves with a flawless program. Hundreds of applications got split into hundreds more of applications. When they went live, everything worked perfectly. They went through an intense amount of instrumentation. Every system, every leaf within their IT stack, OS, applications, databases, servers, storage, networks, everything was, they put probes and data, these little data probes in everything, and drove metrics all the way up into these dashboards where they could see literally everything and all their dependencies and track every change that they needed to make make the operation successful. By having that level of granularity and visibility, they were able to execute against a ridiculously complex program. You're talking about splitting two Fortune 100 companies. As a result, you've got a Fortune 20 company splitting into two Fortune 100 companies. But that's also enabling them now to move very quickly and split again, as you see in the press. So it can actually be an enabler to your business strategy. That's
a great point, and one that's probably not often thought about is, we get the benefits of consolidation,
yeah.
But the benefits of disaggregation is actually an important point as well. We do have a little bit of time to take some questions from the audience. If there's somebody that has a burning question, if you raise your hand, we'll get a microphone to you. In the remaining minutes, and we do have about 10 minutes left, I'd like to get a couple of questions from you guys, if possible. If not, I'm more than happy to continue the line of questioning. We'll let you think about it. One of the biggest trends, I think, in IT, and we tend to see this regularly. I've been around a long time in IT, and my eyesight tells me exactly how long I've been around in the industry. You see these things come and go, and 1 minute it's IT service management, and the next minute it's agile and DevOps. What is it about those things that make them more effective or less effective? How do you see that area of technology playing out? Are they just labels to traditional ways of doing things, or are they substantially different, and this is the way the future is going to look?
It's just about iterative cycle times that are getting smaller and smaller, faster and faster over time. So I think it's all part of one broader kind of trend. One of the things that technology and software does very well is it goes after inefficiencies where developers can see those inefficiencies. So because developers can see everything along the SDLC that stymies them, they're going to build all these DevOps tools that go after all the inefficiencies in the cycles that will drive out every last ounce of inefficiency in that over time. Overall, what's happening is you'll get faster and faster, more and more software release velocity. So software will keep beating the world faster and faster. That's an inexorable trend over time.
Do we have a question? I saw a hand up. No? It's an interesting challenge, and I think to use a construction analogy, and I know there are a few people in the audience from the construction industry. You often get the excitement of building something new, and technology's had that aura about it. You know, we're constantly building something new. But if you look at it in the scale of a big city, you build something new, it inherently loses its desirability, its appeal, the demographic changes, and you're suddenly left with a slum, to use a pretty ordinary parallel. But for those companies that can see themselves on the path to decline, unfortunately, as again to referencing Colin's presentation this morning, what's your advice to those organisations? You said looking for a compelling event. How do you really tap into that compelling event and make it more compelling?
If you look at the way technology companies come up with their great ideas, there's really two kind of branches to it. You have the conceptual companies, and then you have the experimental ones. And this is similar in other kind of fields of innovation. There have been studies on this. But some of them, you'll come up with the idea in whole cloth. You'll have the idea right out of the gates, and you don't really have to iterate or pivot your way to what we call product market fit. In a lot of other companies, you have a series of pivots, and you're really trying to iterate into a new product that fits the market. So there's really two different approaches. In all cases, it comes down with finding the people who can find the product that can change the market. And so I think that's really the key. Also, to go back to one of your questions earlier, what are some of the big things that will change the world? I think a lot of people are probably tired of hearing about virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality, but those really will reformat the world. It's really an opportunity to recode the entire world as we know it. And I had dinner with Satya Nadella a little while back, and I really want to talk to him about what Delphix could do with them in Azure and in the cloud. All he wanted to talk about was augmented reality. That was literally the single topic he was most passionate about. And a lot of people don't understand how big of a change that can be, but it'll be a huge change. In the next decade, all of the monitors sitting on our desktops will disappear, and whatever you're using for augmented reality or mixed reality or virtual reality will give you an infinite monitor, and just different ways of dealing with what we use for productivity and tools today.
It's actually interesting to see the phenomenon of Pokemon Go and realise that they're already halfway to what Second Life was trying to achieve 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's way accelerated from what people were thinking.
Yeah.
So you'll get these interesting applications of technology that people didn't anticipate that can be lightning successes.
And while we see that as a quirky game today, that could be a threat in the future, commercial.
Or somebody will commercialize something like that, and we'll look back and go, wow, that they did that so early on, and the commercial success will be outrageous and outstanding. It's things that can be counted in the billions.
We do have time for a couple of questions. There must be one or two. Thank you.
2 seconds.
Oh, g'day. Nick Marks here from Singtel Optus. With a lot of these new paradigms like AR, for example, I'm just wondering, you mentioned that data centricity is key, data at the centre of your operating model. How complex and difficult does it become to maintain that data centricity with such obscure and esoteric paradigms like AR? What does data mean in AR, as an example?
Yeah, even things like AI, if you look at AI, machine learning, natural language processing, if you've collected all the data, a lot of these tools and frameworks will just be available from companies like Google or Facebook or this or that, and you'll be able to apply those to your data sets. I think that's something that will happen. So even these things that are at the high end of the spectrum of complexity that really take teams and armies of rocket scientists to build, a lot of them will get open sourced. It's just like what happened with Kubernetes and the ability to manage thousands, millions of servers concurrently for scaled up operations. These things are things that will get released into the open source community. The open source movement, that's fueling this software is eating the world phenomenon.
Did that answer the question?
Yeah, no, that's good.
Another question from the audience? One down the back.
As I said, I'm an old rugby player, so it's difficult to get around.
John Tyson, Secure Parking. Question I've got is, how do you stop the platform from actually eating your product? Because you talk about these massive platforms. We come up with an idea, we put it on top of one of these platforms. How do I stop the platform just taking over?
Yeah, if you can, it really comes down to your differentiation. So if you build the right kind of application, if you don't reach escape velocity, or if you don't drive enough stickiness and differentiation, certainly the platform can build a competitor, or it can just buy you and eat you. So one of the things that, one of the most important things, even if you get product market fit of a new product in a new space, you always have to think about competitive differentiation. And that competitive differential is the lifeblood of sustained success. And companies in the Valley, we're obsessed with differentiation in everything that we do, in our products, in our user experience design, in our digital marketing strategies, in our digital selling strategies. You're looking for differentiation in all 360 degrees of your operation. So you have to have an obsession with that.
Another one up the back.
Jed, you mentioned open source technologies. Can you expand on that a little bit? How much are you seeing that being adopted in the Valley? How important is it? In what areas? I'm very interested to hear what's happening there.
Yeah, a lot of what I talked about that's changed in this last decade, that's facilitated this rise of the AppZillows and software that can reach, millions and then billions of people. All of that is on the back of open source. None of that's happening, for instance, on Microsoft and .NET. It's all happening on Linux. There's one of the things that's actually Atlassian here in Australia. One of the things that they've proven is that you can get out to developers really quickly today with freemium and or open source products. They took their freemium type products, or at least the free try products, and made it free to the Apache Open Source Foundation, which allowed all of the open source development programs started using it, and that was a way to proselytize their applications and tools to this huge community of influencers in development, the 10Xer developers, the top of the pyramid developers, and then that kind of percolates down through the rest of the development world. But open source has created a whole different way of touching a huge base of people who drive the development of the software that eats the world. And all of these new products that are getting built are all built on open source. So both of my last two companies, we start with open source stacks and then build our differentiation on top of it. And so that layer of what you can use to build your companies, that gets thicker and more feature rich every single year. It's just huge amount of raw building material for building an application that might be an infrastructure or all the way up in user space.
Possibly got time for one or two more quick questions. So I'm glad to see that the audience has warmed up a little bit.
I have one question. You mentioned obviously open source. Sorry, I'm out from behind the stage. There are obviously got the big incumbent players talking about their relationship with open source and what they're doing with that. Is that a real thing that they're doing, or are they just protecting what they have already and they're trying to attract or keep or retain?
Yeah, they're really just trying to maintain their position in the marketplace. I think I look at most of the big incumbents as the tech dinosaurs who are just waiting to get smashed by the cloud. They just can't exist in the cloud world as enterprise apps, and they're not really migrating in mass yet, but they're starting to. As they really start migrating into the cloud, I think the overall margins that are being driven by the products by the Dells and the EMCs and the NetApps and the HPs and the even the Oracles, even as you move up the stack to things that are less and less commoditized, most of that is not going to survive the transition. And the reason why is companies like Amazon, they're putting a huge investment into things and then making them either open source or as free services that are just driving usage of servers and compute and storage and the overall data center and system stack that they're selling. So what they're doing is they're basically releasing all of that technology, that entire stack technology, and there's this race to zero. They're just giving it away for free because their wallet share is down at the system stack and down to the data center, which is actually bigger from a wallet perspective than any of these tech companies. They don't sell data centers. So Amazon can afford to commoditize everything that everybody else is selling at high margin. So most of them cannot survive the crossing to the cloud over the long haul. It's mostly lip service. It's like Microsoft today, their OS is as cheap as Red Hat if you really look at the expenses. And so, of course, they're going to start doing open source. And they're just trying to keep the whole legacy world of people who have expertise around Microsoft to stay on Microsoft. They're just trying to stem the overall tide. But if you dial for 10, 20, 30 years, all of the major innovations and all of the speed is going to come on the open source side.
Well, look, I'd just like to thank Jed and John. I think that's a great armchair session. So thanks very much. I hope everyone in the audience can please join. Thank you.